I am Joshua, 32 years old, and my own father left me bleeding on an emergency room table because my grown brother had a minor temper tantrum. Before I tell you about the explosive moment I finally cut them off and took my life back, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The first thing I remember is the smell. It was that sharp, sterile hospital odor of bleach and iodine that burns the back of your throat, mixed with the metallic tang of my own blood. Then came the sound. The steady, terrifying, high-pitched beep of the heart monitor next to my bed. I was lying flat on a hard, unforgiving gurney under glaring, aggressively bright fluorescent lights that made my eyes water. My right leg felt like it had been crushed in a heavy industrial vise, and every single breath I took sent a jagged, blinding spike of pain straight through my ribs. The car crash had happened only an hour ago. A drunk driver ran a red light at an intersection I had crossed 1,000 times and completely T-boned my sedan. I was lucky to be alive, the paramedics had told me as they used the jaws of life to pry my crushed door open. But in that moment, shivering violently under a paper-thin hospital blanket, I did not feel lucky. I felt completely and utterly terrified. My phone was resting heavily on my chest. The glass screen was entirely shattered, webbing outward from the center, much like my own life at that very moment. I had somehow managed to dial my father's number with a trembling, blood-stained thumb while the EMTs were still cutting me out of the smoking wreckage. I needed him. For 32 years, I had played the role of the dependable, quiet son, the one who never asked for a single favor. Now I was begging for my dad to just show up, to be a father. The line connected. I heard his voice. It was not filled with panic. It was not filled with the frantic fear you would expect for a firstborn son. It was cold, clipped, and heavy with deep, unmistakable annoyance. "Are you dying, Joshua?" He snapped immediately. The question hit me harder than the airbag had. I swallowed the thick, copper taste of blood pooling in my mouth and tried to force the words past my bruised throat. "Dad, I was in a crash. The car is completely totaled. My ribs are broken. I can't feel my foot. I am in the ER at Memorial Hospital." A heavy, exasperated sigh echoed through the speaker. I could hear rustling in the background, a muffled, dramatic sob. "Listen to me," Robert said, his tone dropping into a harsh whisper. "Do not call here in a panic and make a big scene. You are in a hospital, so you are fine. The doctors are paid to handle it. Carter needs me right now." Carter, my younger brother. He was 28 years old, perfectly healthy, sitting safely in the comfort of his living room. I closed my eyes tightly, a single hot tear cutting through the dried blood caked on my cheek. "Dad, I am bleeding. I am entirely alone." "Stop being dramatic." His voice rose, harsh, echoing in my ear and unforgiving. "You always do this. You turn absolutely everything into a massive crisis the second the attention is not on you. Carter is devastated. He just got a rejection email from that marketing firm he interviewed with. He is spiraling, Joshua. He is having a severe panic attack. I cannot leave him alone in this state. Grow up and handle your own problems for once in your life." The line went completely dead. The silence that followed was louder than the wailing sirens that had brought me there. He hung up. He actually hung up. He chose my brother's wounded ego over my shattered bones. I stared blankly at the ceiling tiles, my chest heaving with shallow, agonizing breaths. The realization washed over me like a bucket of ice water. I was alone. A few excruciating minutes later, the heavy fabric curtain surrounding my cubicle was pulled back. A nurse stepped in. Her name tag read Sarah. She had kind, incredibly tired eyes that had clearly seen too much tragedy for one night shift. She moved directly to my side and checked my foreline, her movements gentle and highly professional. She glanced down at my shattered phone resting on my chest, the screen still glowing faintly, and then looked directly into my face. "We are taking you back for a full set of x-rays in just a few minutes, sweetheart," Sarah said softly. She reached out and pulled a warm, heavy cotton blanket from a nearby cart. She draped it over my trembling body, carefully tucking the edges around my shivering shoulders to trap the heat. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, her eyes drifting toward the empty, cheap plastic guest chair sitting in the corner of my cubicle. Is anyone coming for you? Family? A friend? I desperately wanted to say yes. I wanted to proudly tell her that my father was rushing through the sliding glass doors right now, demanding the front desk let him see his son. But the truth was a bitter, jagged pill lodged deep in my throat. I looked back at Sarah. My voice was nothing but a raspy, broken whisper. No. Sarah stopped tucking the blanket. Her hands froze. Her expression softened with a deep, knowing pity that made my stomach churn. She did not ask why. She did not push for details. She just gently patted my uninjured shoulder, offered a sad smile, and stepped out of the room, leaving me alone with the rhythmic, mocking beeping of the heart monitor. Saying that single word out loud fundamentally changed something inside my chest. No, it was the most honest I had been with myself in decades. I closed my eyes, letting the darkness take over the blinding hospital lights. I realized right then that my father's absence tonight was not a strange anomaly. It was the undeniable climax of a lifelong pattern. This cold, hard hospital bed was not where the neglect started. It was just the final, irrefutable proof. This was not the beginning of my pain. This was the end of a 30-year illusion. As I lay there waiting for the imaging technicians to will me away, my mind drifted back through the years, flipping through memories like a gruesome photo album. My parents went through a terrible, messy divorce when I was just 12 years old. My mother walked out the front door with a single suitcase to start a brand new life across the country. She never looked back. That left me and a young, crying Carter alone with our father. From that exact moment on, Robert made it crystal clear who the priority in the household was. Carter was fragile. Carter was sensitive. Carter needed constant protection. I was just Joshua. I was expected to be the rock. I thought about my high school graduation day. I had worked tirelessly for 4 straight years, studying until 2 a.m. every night, securing a partial academic scholarship, and making the honor roll every single semester. I stood on that humid football field in my cheap polyester cap and gown, scanning the packed bleachers for my dad's face among the cheering families. He was not there. The seat I had saved for him remained glaringly empty. When the ceremony ended, I walked the 2 miles back home in my stiff dress shoes. I found him sitting casually on the living room couch with Carter. Carter had broken up with his high school girlfriend that morning. My dad completely missed me walking across the stage just to sit and wipe away the tears of a teenager who got dumped right before prom. You understand, right? My dad had said to me that evening, not even bothering to look up from his cup of coffee as I walked through the door holding my diploma. Carter is in a really bad place today. You are strong. You do not need me holding your hand to celebrate. I had simply nodded. I swallowed my massive pride, quietly folded my diploma, and shoved it in the back of my desk drawer. Over the years, that became my defining trait in the family dynamic. I was the umbrella shielding them from the rain, getting entirely soaked in the process. When it came time for me to go to college, I learned a brutal truth. The modest college fund our late grandparents had set up for both of us was completely empty. Robert had secretly drained my half to pay for Carter's incredibly expensive gap-year travels through Europe because Carter needed time to find himself. I did not scream. I did not complain. I just got a grueling job waiting tables at night and worked retail shifts all weekend. I sacrificed my entire salary for 4 years just to pay my own tuition and buy used textbooks. I eventually earned my promotion to a regional store manager while taking exhausting night classes. All the while, my father was happily sending Carter monthly rent money and paying off his maxed-out credit cards without a second thought. The memories kept hitting me, wave after wave, each one stinging significantly worse than the deep glass cuts on my face. The absolute worst offense happened just 3 years ago. My dad had purchased a used Porsche. It was his absolute pride and joy, a glaring symbol of his midlife crisis. One Friday night, Carter took the keys off the kitchen counter without asking, got completely drunk at a massive college frat party, and crashed the Porsche straight into a neighbor's expensive brick fence. I was the one who got the frantic, slurring phone call at 3 a.m. I was the one who drove out to the scene, dealt with the furious property owner, begged the police officers for leniency, and paid for the heavy-duty tow truck straight out of my own pocket just so Carter would not get arrested and thrown in jail. When we finally got back to the house as the sun was coming up, I expected my father to completely explode in rage. Instead, Robert rushed forward and hugged Carter tightly. He stroked his hair, wiped his face, and told him it was just a learning experience. He actually praised Carter for surviving the crash he caused. Exactly 2 weeks later, I borrowed my dad's old pickup truck to move a heavy couch into my new, cramped apartment across town. I returned the truck completely safe, scratch-free, and parked it exactly where I found it. But I forgot to fill the gas tank all the way back to the top. I left it at 3/4 full. My father completely lost his mind. He screamed at me for a full hour. He called me irresponsible, selfish, and incredibly entitled. He stood right in the middle of my small living room, veins popping aggressively in his neck, aggressively lecturing me on the true value of a hard-earned dollar and my lack of family duty. Lying in the ER, the sheer contrast made me physically sick to my stomach. My constant reliability was never celebrated. It was aggressively exploited. Every single time I fixed one of Carter's massive messes, I was essentially funding my father's endless irresponsibility. I was the family ATM. I paid their utility bills without question when Robert claimed money was tight. I foolishly co-signed loans I should never have touched. The heavy pain medication the nurse finally pushed into my foreline began to take the sharp edge off my physical agony. But my mental clarity was sharper than it had ever been. I had spent my entire adult life desperately trying to earn a father's love by being useful. But competence does not buy love. It only buys more chores and heavier burdens. I had always been their reliable shield. But tonight, bleeding alone under those bright fluorescent lights, I finally decided to fold that shield up. I was entirely done. I forced my heavy eyes open. The hospital room was deathly quiet now. The wall clock read nearly 3 a.m. My right arm was heavily battered, purple bruising already spreading across my bicep, but I could still move my fingers. I reached across my chest for my shattered phone. The cracked glass literally bit into my skin as I painfully unlocked the screen. I opened my contacts list. I stared at the names Dad and Carter for a long second, feeling absolutely nothing. I scrolled right past them down to the letter E. Elijah. He was a ruthless, brilliant corporate lawyer I had met through a mutual business friend years ago. He had helped me successfully review a tricky employment contract once, and I distinctly remembered his sharp, cold, calculating logic. I did not care what time it was. I did not care if I woke him up. I hit the call button. He answered on the 4th ring. Joshua? Do you know what time it is? His voice was thick with heavy sleep but immediately alert. Elijah. My voice shook violently, raw and desperate. I am in the emergency room at Memorial. I was in a terrible car crash. I am safe physically, I think, but I need you. I need legal help. Right now. The sleep completely vanished from his tone. Are you in trouble with the police? Was there a fatality? No. I breathed out, the heart monitor beeping slightly faster as my adrenaline spiked. I am in trouble with my family. I want to cut them off. Everything. The joint bank accounts, the shared properties, the legal power of attorney I gave him. I want to sever every single tie. I want to leave them with absolutely nothing that legally belongs to me. Saying those exact words out loud in the quiet room was utterly terrifying. It felt like stepping off a steep cliff in pitch darkness. But the very moment the words left my lips, I felt an incredible, undeniable surge of power. A lifetime of swallowed yes and forced apologies was finally breaking into one massive, earth-shattering no. Okay, Elijah said smoothly, his voice acting as a steady, unbreakable anchor in my chaotic storm. Do you have the necessary documentation? Yes, I replied instantly. Everything is saved on my laptop. I had begged a passing nurse to retrieve my heavy laptop bag from the twisted wreckage of my car when the tow truck driver brought my personal belongings into the lobby. Miraculously, the heavy-duty padded case had protected the computer entirely. With my good, uninjured arm, I dragged the black bag up onto the hospital bed and awkwardly flipped the screen open. The bright bluish glow illuminated the dark, sterile room. I aggressively typed in my passwords, logging directly into my banking portals to send Elijah the preliminary screenshots of our joint finances. I started pulling up the main joint account I shared with my father, the specific account I deposited money into religiously for family emergencies. I immediately noticed something was horribly wrong. My available balance was significantly lower than it should have been. Thousands of dollars were simply missing. My heart pounded violently against my bruised ribs. I rapidly clicked into the detailed transaction history. There, buried under a massive sea of electric bills and grocery runs, was a massive recurring monthly deduction. A loan payment. I dug deeper, fingers flying across the trackpad, accessing my full credit report through a secondary financial portal. My stomach completely dropped. The room spun. There was a massive second mortgage taken out against the small, rustic cabin I had inherited from my grandfather. The inheritance that was supposed to be my ultimate safety net. The loan was entirely in my name, legally authorized by the power of attorney I had foolishly signed over to my father 3 years ago when I had a major abdominal surgery and just wanted to make sure my bills were paid if things went horribly wrong on the operating table. He had leveraged my property behind my back. I frantically looked at the routing numbers attached to the loan disbursement. The massive funds from that fraudulent mortgage had gone directly into Carter's private checking account. Robert had actually used my grandfather's inheritance to fund Carter's lavish lifestyle. His ridiculous designer clothes, his expensive sports car lease, his overseas vacations. My initial shock quickly morphed into pure, unadulterated disgust. The last remaining, pathetic thread of guilt I felt about cutting them off snapped completely. This was no longer just about emotional neglect. This was calculated financial abuse. This was outright theft wrapped neatly in the guise of family loyalty. I systematically downloaded every single bank statement, every hidden transfer record, and every forged signature document I could find. I emailed the massive zip file directly to Elijah. My family had treated me like a bank for 30 years. Tomorrow morning, the bank was closing its doors forever. Morning sunlight leaked aggressively through the hospital room blinds, casting harsh, straight shadows across the sterile linoleum floor. Exactly at 8 a.m., the heavy wooden door to my room swung open. Elijah walked in. He wore a sharp, perfectly tailored navy suit and carried a sleek leather briefcase. He looked completely out of place in the chaotic medical setting, acting as a quiet, stoic force of absolute order stepping into my personal nightmare. He pulled up a plastic chair right next to my bed, snapped his briefcase open, and pulled out a massive stack of thick, stapled legal documents. "I stayed up reviewing the files you sent," Elijah said, his tone entirely devoid of any emotion, which was exactly what I desperately needed. "Your father has systematically siphoned nearly $80,000 over the last 4 years, and that is not even including the fraudulent loan against your inheritance. This isn't just poor boundaries, Joshua. This is systemic, intentional financial dependence." His sharp words hit me like physical blows to my chest, finally confirming everything I had suspected but deeply feared to admit to myself. "Can we stop it entirely?" I asked, my voice finally steady and cold. "We already are," Elijah replied confidently. He reached into his pocket and handed me a heavy metal pen. "Sign these immediately. This specific document revokes the power of attorney effective immediately. This one freezes all joint accounts. This removes Robert and Carter as designated beneficiaries from your life insurance and your will. I have also already initiated the formal fraud claim regarding the cabin mortgage with the bank." I eagerly took the pen. My right hand was wrapped heavily in thick white gauze, my knuckles badly bruised purple and yellow, but my grip was incredibly firm. Every single signature I scrawled on those dotted lines felt like physically stitching a piece of my soul back together. I was finally building a massive fortress, and Elijah was my architect. Right as I signed the very last page, Dr. Andrew, the hospital's lead trauma surgeon, walked in with a clipboard. He checked my medical charts, looking incredibly grim. You took a massive hit last night, Joshua. You have 3 badly fractured ribs, a completely shattered tibia, and a minor spleen laceration. If that drunk driver's truck had hit your door 2 inches to the left, we would be planning a funeral today instead of talking about physical therapy. Elijah looked right at me, slowly raising a single eyebrow. My own father had confidently told me over the phone that I wasn't dying and to stop being dramatic. I nodded firmly at Elijah. The shield was officially up. Now we simply wait for the attack. By early afternoon, the heavy doses of painkillers had me drifting in and out of a very restless, uncomfortable sleep. My shattered phone suddenly buzzed violently on the plastic tray table. I reached over and saw a new text message pop up from Dylan. Dylan was an old college buddy, a guy who still hung around my brother Carter from time to time at local bars. The text read, "Hey man, just heard about the terrible crash. That seriously sucks. You at Memorial Hospital? Which room? Might drop by later to check on you." I felt a very brief, pathetic flicker of warmth in my chest. Maybe someone outside actually cared. I typed back slowly, "Yeah, Memorial. Room 412. It was a really rough night." Exactly 10 minutes later, I received an automated notification from my email app. It was a security login alert from our shared family cloud account. Out of pure, paranoid curiosity, I immediately checked the recent activity log. I saw a brand new screenshot uploaded just seconds ago directly from Carter's iPhone. It was a text message conversation between Carter and Dylan. Dylan had written, "He's up in room 412 at Memorial. Tell your dad." Carter instantly replied, "Thanks bro, Dad is completely furious that Josh is causing drama. We're heading there right now to set him straight." I stared intensely at the cracked screen, my jaw clenching so hard my back teeth actually ached. Dylan didn't care about my crash or my shattered leg at all. He was actively acting as a scout for my father. The sheer betrayal stung deeply, but it also rapidly sharpened my focus. The rats were actively working together against me. I turned the phone and showed the damning screenshot directly to Elijah, who was sitting quietly in the corner reviewing his extensive legal notes. Elijah did not look surprised in the slightest. He simply closed his leather folder with a snap and checked his expensive watch. "They are coming here to physically intimidate you into silence," he said calmly, leaning back in his chair. "They assume you are physically weak, heavily medicated, and easily compliant like you always have been." I sat up slightly, wincing loudly as my broken ribs protested the movement. I looked toward the door. Let them come. Less than 5 minutes later, I heard the heavy, aggressive, unmistakable thud of footsteps marching down the quiet hallway corridor. I knew that specific walk anywhere in the world. It was the sound of a man who firmly believed he owned the very ground he walked on. My heart hammered wildly against my bruised chest. The storm was finally here. The heavy wooden door to hospital room 412 flew violently open without a single knock. It slammed loudly against the drywall with a massive bang. Robert marched straight into the room, his face flushed and angry, bright red. His tie loosened messily around his thick neck. Carter trailed right behind him, wearing expensive designer sunglasses indoors like some sort of ridiculous celebrity hiding from the paparazzi. He looked perfectly fine. No red eyes, no tears, absolutely no signs of a devastating panic attack. Just the usual bored, highly entitled expression he always wore. Robert did not rush to my bedside to check my injuries. He did not ask how my shattered leg was or if I was in any pain. He stood aggressively at the foot of my bed, planted his heavy hands on his hips, and glared fiercely down at me. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Robert barked loudly, his angry voice echoing in the small room. "Do you have any idea how much unnecessary stress you caused this family today? You deliberately made Carter feel terrible about his job rejection. You are so incredibly selfish, Joshua. I clearly told you we had a major crisis at home, and you fully expect us to drop everything to come hold your hand over a minor fender bender." I looked directly at Carter. "A fender bender?" I asked quietly, slowly gesturing to the massive heavy cast elevating my entire right leg and the multiple 4 tubes running into my bruised arm. Carter scoffed loudly, dramatically crossing his arms over his chest. You always exaggerate absolutely everything. Dad said you were perfectly fine. I needed him here with me. You have a stable salary. I don't. Try having some basic empathy for your family for once in your life. Then, Robert finally shifted his gaze and noticed the man in the sharp suit sitting quietly in the corner of the room. He frowned deeply. Who the hell is this guy? Are you bothering the busy hospital staff now too? Elijah stood up slowly, calmly buttoning his tailored suit jacket. His sheer presence commanded the entire room instantly. My name is Elijah Grant. I am Joshua's legal counsel. Carter let out a sharp, incredibly mocking laugh. A lawyer? Seriously, Josh? What? Are you aggressively suing the guy who hit your car to get some quick settlement money, so you can finally stop whining about your salary? No, I said, my voice dropping an octave lower. The air in the room grew ice cold. I looked my father dead in the eyes, refusing to blink. He is not here for the drunk driver. He is here for you. Robert's face instantly contorted into a wild mix of deep confusion and pure, unadulterated rage. Excuse me? After absolutely everything I did for you? I raised you in my house. I put clothes on your back when your mother left. I paid for your childhood. And this is the respect I get? I have custody of your life. Boy, don't you ever forget it. You didn't raise me. I shot back, the anger I had swallowed for 30 years finally boiling over the edge. You raised an ATM machine. You raised a convenient safety net to fund your favorite child's failures. I looked at Elijah and nodded firmly. Play it. Elijah pulled out his smartphone, tapped the screen once, and placed it flat on the metal tray table. The sterile hospital room was suddenly filled with the cold, echoing recording of the phone call from the night before. Are you dying, Joshua? Stop being dramatic. Carter is devastated. Grow up and handle your own problems for once in your life. The recording stopped abruptly. The heavy silence that followed was completely suffocating. Carter swallowed hard, suddenly looking very small and incredibly nervous. Robert's face completely drained of color. He opened his mouth to speak, to spin a familiar lie, but Elijah ruthlessly cut him off. As of 10 minutes ago, Elijah said, his voice ringing with absolute, terrifying authority. Joshua has officially revoked your legal power of attorney. All joint bank accounts have been entirely frozen and the funds transferred to a secure, private trust. You have been legally removed as beneficiaries from all estate planning. Robert lunged forward wildly, aggressively grabbing the footboard of the hospital bed. You can't do that to me. That money belongs to this family. How is Carter supposed to pay his rent next month? That is exactly the point, Elijah continued relentlessly, pulling out a thick manila folder and slamming it hard onto the table. We also found the fraudulent second mortgage you illegally took out on Joshua's inherited cabin. We have filed a formal report with the bank's fraud department. If you ever attempt to contact Joshua regarding finances again, we will immediately press criminal charges for identity theft and embezzlement. I watched the exact, terrifying moment my father realized his entire kingdom had collapsed. His mouth hung open in shock. The arrogant posture vanished instantly, replaced by the trembling reality of an old man who just lost his only cash cow. He looked at me, expecting to see the frightened, obedient son he had molded. Instead, he saw a stranger made of pure stone. Here is the thing about power. Once you realize the person holding the leash is actually weaker than you, the leash just falls away. This was the moment that changed absolutely everything. I had finally taken the wheel of my own life. If you've ever had to stand up to toxic family, hit the like button and drop a 1 in the comments. It helps me know I am not alone in this fight. Joshua, please, Carter whined pathetically, his voice cracking loudly. He practically pushed past our stunned father to get closer to my bed. The arrogant sunglasses were quickly ripped off. The extreme entitlement was entirely gone. replaced by the pathetic, crying desperation of a parasite realizing it is losing its host. I don't have a job right now. The rent is due next week. You know my anxiety acts up severely when I don't have financial stability. You can't just abandon me like Mom did. I looked closely at my younger brother. I actively searched my heart for the familiar, painful pang of guilt, the deep urge to fix it, to rescue him like I always did. I waited for the pity to arrive, but there was absolutely nothing there. Just an empty, hollow, incredibly peaceful space. "You are 28 years old, Carter," I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. "Your rent is not my problem anymore. Your anxiety is not my problem." I was lying on a gurney coughing up my own blood, and you made it entirely about a marketing job rejection. Do not ever speak to me about abandonment. Robert took a shaky step back, his hands shaking violently at his sides. He pointed a trembling, furious finger at me. "You are dead to me. Do you hear me? You walk down this road today, you lose your family forever. I will make sure everyone in our family knows exactly what a backstabbing, ungrateful son you truly are." Elijah stepped smoothly and intimidatingly between my bed and my father. "This conversation is officially over. You will leave this hospital immediately, or I will have armed security violently escort you out for harassing a trauma patient." My father stared at Elijah with pure venom, then looked at me one last hateful time. There was absolutely no love in his eyes. There was only the bitter, furious hatred of a thief who had been caught red-handed. He violently turned on his heel and stormed angrily out of the hospital room. Carter lingered for a pathetic second, actual tears spilling down his cheeks, waiting for me to break and hand him my credit card. I just turned my head away to look out the window. A second later, the heavy door clicked shut. They were gone. The silence in the room after they finally left was absolutely stunning. It was not the heavy, oppressive, terrifying silence of waiting for an argument to start. It was the clean, crisp, incredibly refreshing silence you feel right after a massive thunderstorm has passed. I leaned my head back heavily against the hospital pillow and let out a long, ragged breath. My broken ribs flared with intense pain, but I actually smiled. For the first time in my entire life, I felt incredibly light. Elijah packed his leather briefcase with precise, highly methodical movements. "They will try to retaliate aggressively," he warned me seriously, snapping the heavy brass locks shut. "Toxic people do not ever surrender quietly. They will use immense guilt. They will deploy flying monkeys to harass you. They will try to completely ruin your reputation online. Let them," I whispered softly. Later that exact night, my new replacement phone began to vibrate incessantly on the bedside table. I picked it up. There were 34 brand new text messages. Most of them were from Robert. "You are destroying this family over a stupid misunderstanding. Carter is hyperventilating on the floor. I hope you are happy with yourself. You owe me your salary for raising you. You are a coward." Then came the furious messages from Carter. "I hate you so much. You were always jealous of me. Dad is right, you're literally crazy." I read them all, feeling entirely detached, as if I were reading a poorly written fictional story about absolute strangers. They were simply playing their greatest hits, desperately trying to trigger the deeply programmed guilt inside me. But the code had been permanently rewritten. I went directly to my phone settings. I clicked on Robert's contact. Block caller. I clicked on Carter's contact. Block caller. I blocked Dylan, the pathetic informant, too. I set the phone down. The screen went dark. The annoying buzzing finally stopped. I lay there in the quiet of the hospital room, peacefully watching the city lights blink through the window. The physical road to recovery would be long. I had months of painful physical therapy ahead of me, massive medical bills to navigate, and a shattered leg to heal. But the mental war was entirely over. I had drawn a massive boundary made of solid steel, and I was finally safe behind it. The first week back in my own apartment was the hardest, and it had absolutely nothing to do with the physical pain. The hospital had officially discharged me with a heavy fiberglass cast securely wrapping my entire right leg, a strict, heavily regulated regimen of painkillers, and a massive stack of medical bills that I would have to carefully navigate over the coming months. Stepping through my own front door, leaning heavily and awkwardly on a pair of cold aluminum crutches, the sheer silence of my home hit me differently than it ever had before. For years, my apartment was just a temporary staging ground. It was simply the quiet place I slept for a few hours between working double shifts, or the place I nervously paced the floorboards while desperately figuring out how to financially cover Carter's latest, inevitably expensive disaster. Now, standing in the small entryway, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, I realized it was a fortress. It was entirely mine. The quiet was no longer lonely. It was completely safe. But as my lawyer, Elijah, had so accurately predicted back in that sterile hospital room, the highly toxic machine I had aggressively unplugged did not just power down quietly. It sputtered, it sparked violently, and it desperately tried to start a massive fire to burn me to the ground. 3 days after I was discharged, I made the foolish mistake of opening my laptop to check my personal email while sitting on my living room couch. I had successfully blocked my father and my brother on my phone, ensuring they could not text or call me directly, but I had not deactivated my old social media accounts yet. I simply hadn't thought about it. A red notification bell popped up on my screen. I clicked it out of pure, mindless habit. It was a public Facebook post from Robert. He had intentionally tagged a dozen extended family members to ensure maximum visibility. It was an absolute masterclass in emotional manipulation and public gaslighting. Sometimes the people you sacrifice your entire life for are the ones who betray you the deepest. The incredibly dramatic post read, I raised my boys as a dedicated single father. After the brutal divorce, I fought aggressively for full custody because I loved them. I gave them absolutely everything. I worked my fingers to the bone to provide a solid roof over their heads and warm food on their plates. I sacrificed my own happiness. And today, in my old age, I learned that family loyalty means absolutely nothing to some people. Please pray for my youngest son, Carter, who is going through an incredibly dark, depressive time right now, while others in this family arrogantly turn their backs on us over petty, insignificant financial grievances. Family is supposed to be forever. I sat completely frozen, staring at the glowing screen. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of the post was breathtaking. My jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. He had successfully, shamelessly rewritten our entire family history in a single, perfectly crafted paragraph. There was absolutely no mention of the horrific car crash. There was no mention of me bleeding alone on a cold hospital gurney while he complained about Carter's hurt feelings. There was no mention of the fraudulent, illegal second mortgage he secretly took out against my grandfather's inheritance to fund Carter's designer wardrobe. To the outside world, to our aunts and uncles and old family friends, I was just a bitter, wealthy, incredibly ungrateful son who had inexplicably abandoned his poor, struggling, heroic father. The comments section beneath the post was a disgusting swamp of enablers. Extended family members I hadn't seen or spoken to in a decade were piling on with eager judgment. So incredibly sorry, Robert. Kids these days have absolutely no respect for their elders. Stay strong. Loyalty is everything. He will realize his mistake eventually. You are a great father. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. We are praying for Carter. My chest tightened painfully. A hot flush of pure rage crawled up my neck. My hands hovered aggressively over the laptop keyboard. Every single survival instinct I had developed over 30 years screamed at me to defend myself. I desperately wanted to type out the brutal truth. I wanted to publicly post the audio recording of him telling me to stop being dramatic while I was literally coughing up my own blood. I wanted to upload the highlighted bank statements clearly showing how he stole my inheritance to buy Carter a luxury watch. I wanted to aggressively burn his fake public image right to the ground and watch the ashes scatter. My heart pounded violently against my bruised ribs. The pure adrenaline made my hands shake over the keys. But then I stopped. I pulled my hands slowly away from the keyboard. I closed my eyes and remembered the cold, highly clinical look on Elijah's face when he handed me those legal documents in the hospital. "Silence is absolute power," Elijah had said, his voice ringing in my memory. "When you actively argue with a manipulator, you are just feeding their false narrative. You are handing them the exact drama they desperately crave. Starve them. Starve them of your reaction." So I did exactly that. I did not type a single angry word. I did not hit the furious reaction button. I simply navigated into my account settings, clicked the security tab, and permanently deactivated my entire profile. I watched the screen go completely blank, severing the digital cord. I took a deep, shaky breath, leaning my head back against the couch cushions, feeling the frantic beating of my heart slowly return to a calm, steady rhythm. I did not need to desperately prove my reality to a group of gullible people who only loved the fake, carefully curated version of my father. I knew the absolute truth, and for the very first time in my life, knowing the truth myself was finally enough. Of course, deactivating my Facebook account did not completely stop the real-world intrusion. Toxic families always find a backdoor. The very next afternoon, while I was icing my swollen leg, my phone buzzed loudly on the coffee table. It was a lengthy text message from Uncle Thomas, my father's older brother. Thomas was a man who aggressively prided himself on keeping the peace, which in our highly dysfunctional family always meant forcing the innocent victims to apologize just so the abusers wouldn't make an uncomfortable scene at Thanksgiving. "Joshua," the text read, jumping right to the guilt trip, "your dad called me crying his eyes out this morning. He says you aggressively froze all the joint bank accounts and hired a vicious corporate lawyer to attack him. You need to call off the dogs right now. I don't care what silly argument you guys had yesterday. You do not ever involve lawyers with your own flesh and blood. You are completely destroying your father's health with this stunt. Be the bigger person, pick up the phone and call him. He is your blood." I read the text twice. A month ago, receiving a message exactly like that would have sent me into a devastating tailspin of immense guilt. I would have frantically drafted 10 different apologies, desperately trying to explain my side of the story while simultaneously begging for their forgiveness just to make the anxiety stop. Now, sitting in my quiet, safe apartment, I just felt profoundly exhausted by the sheer predictability of it all. Uncle Thomas was the classic flying monkey. He didn't care about my physical injuries or my well-being. He just wanted me to quickly get back in line, take my designated beating, and resume my role as the family ATM so Robert would stop complaining to him. I decided to reply, but only once. I typed slowly and deliberately. "Uncle Thomas, I was in a severe car crash that nearly killed me. Dad explicitly refused to come to the hospital because Carter was sad about a minor job application. Furthermore, my lawyer discovered Dad took out a massive, fraudulent loan against my inheritance using my forged signature. I am not having an argument. I am actively protecting myself from total financial ruin and severe emotional abuse. Please do not contact me about this situation ever again." I hit send. Thomas replied almost immediately, completely ignoring the terrifying facts I just presented. "There are always two sides to every story, Josh. You are taking this way too far. You will deeply regret this extreme behavior at his funeral one day." The deliberate mention of a funeral didn't even make me flinch. It was a cheap, highly manipulative tactic. I realized right then that if my father died tomorrow, I would mourn the dad I always wished I had, but I would not shed a single tear for the man who actually existed. I blocked Uncle Thomas's phone number without typing another word. The steel boundary was holding perfectly. Just an hour later, my phone rang. It was Elijah. I answered immediately. His voice was sharp, highly professional, and entirely comforting in its cold logic. "I wanted to update you on the bank fraud investigation," Elijah said smoothly, the crisp sound of flipping paper documents echoing clearly on his end of the line. "The bank's aggressive legal team completely reviewed the original power of attorney documents and the forged signature on the secondary cabin mortgage. Because you officially filed the fraud report and provided our evidence, the bank is holding Robert completely and solely liable for the entire remaining balance of the massive loan he took against your property. They are aggressively freezing his personal assets until the debt is fully satisfied. I let out a long, heavy breath, sinking deeper into the couch. What does that actually mean for him practically, Elijah? Practically. Elijah paused, a hint of dark satisfaction in his usually neutral tone. It means your father is going to have to immediately sell his precious Porsche and likely downsize his house just to avoid a federal criminal indictment for bank fraud. And Carter is going to lose his monthly allowance permanently. The bank will seize what they need. Your personal assets, however, are completely detached and legally protected. You are safe, Joshua. They cannot touch your salary, your property, or your future ever again. I hung up the phone and looked around my quiet living room. I had spent my entire adult life terrified, believing that if I ever stopped carrying their massive weight, my entire world would violently collapse. But the world didn't collapse. Only their parasitic, highly dependent world collapsed. Mine was just truly beginning. While the toxic blood relatives I had spent my entire life blindly serving were busy crucifying my name on the internet, an entirely different kind of family started to emerge quietly from the woodwork. Started very small. A few days after the ridiculous Uncle Thomas incident, I heard a soft, hesitant knock on my front door. I grabbed my aluminum crutches, hauled myself upright, and hobbled over, looking carefully through the peephole. It was Ryan, a younger guy I directly managed at the retail company. We were friendly at work, sure, but we usually just talked about weekend sports scores or monthly inventory numbers. We never talked about deep, personal issues. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door. Ryan was standing there awkwardly holding two massive, heavy aluminum trays of baked ziti and a large, overflowing grocery bag. He looked slightly nervous but entirely genuine. "Hey boss," Ryan said, shifting the heavy trays to balance them. "The team at the store heard about the terrible crash. We know you worked incredibly hard to get that big promotion right before this happened, and we really didn't want you stressing out about cooking or shopping while you're laid up in a cast. I brought enough baked pasta to feed you for a solid week, and some fresh groceries for the fridge." I was completely stunned. I stepped back awkwardly to let him into the apartment. "Ryan, you really didn't have to do this. I'm fine. I can order delivery." "Shut up, man," Ryan laughed gently, walking straight to my small kitchen and efficiently loading the food into my refrigerator. "You literally never ask anyone for help. Ever. We noticed that, so we decided not to ask your permission, we just brought it. The whole store pitched in for the groceries. We need our best manager back on his feet, but take your time. We have the sales floor completely covered." He didn't pry into my family situation. He didn't ask awkward questions about why my father wasn't there taking care of me. He didn't ask why I was recovering entirely alone. He just saw a genuine human need and quietly filled it. As he walked out the door a few minutes later, giving me a quick, supportive fist bump, I felt a strange, hot prickling sensation behind my eyes. The very next morning, I opened my front door to grab the Daily Mail. Sitting perfectly centered on my welcome mat was a small, neatly packed care package. It had a fresh bag of my absolute favorite dark roast coffee, a box of high-end waterproof bandages, and a handwritten note taped to the top. The note read, "Saw you struggling heavily with the crutches on the front stairs yesterday afternoon. If you ever need me to take out your heavy trash, run a quick errand to the pharmacy, or just want to sit on the back porch and drink a cold beer without having to talk, just knock hard on apartment 4B. Luke." Luke was my next-door neighbor. We had lived right next to each other for over 2 years and had rarely exchanged more than a polite, quick nod in the hallway while passing. Yet here he was, offering exactly the kind of quiet, undemanding, solid support my own father had never been capable of giving me in 30 years. But the specific moment that finally broke me wide open came late that evening. My phone buzzed loudly with a text from an unsaved phone number. I almost deleted it instantly, assuming it was just another flying monkey dispatched from my father's angry camp. But the short preview text caught my eye. It was from Nathan. Nathan was my older cousin, Uncle Thomas's oldest son. He had moved away to Chicago years ago for work and largely stayed far out of the toxic family drama. "Joshua," The long text message read, "I saw your dad's ridiculous, highly manipulative post on Facebook before you deactivated. I just wanted to reach out privately and tell you that I see entirely through his lies. I always have. I saw exactly how they treated you when we were kids. Carter was always the chaotic storm, and you were always forced to be the umbrella. It was never fair, and you absolutely did not deserve it. I am so incredibly sorry about the crash and what you were going through. Please let me know if you need anything at all. I am firmly in your corner." I read the words, "You were forced to be the umbrella." I read them again and again. I dropped the phone heavily onto the living room couch. I sat down heavily on the cushions, leaned forward, and buried my face deeply in my hands. And for the very first time since the horrific, deafening sound of crunching metal during the car crash, for the very first time since hearing my father's incredibly cold voice dismiss my pain in the emergency room, I cried. I did not cry out of sadness. I did not cry out of grief for the family I lost. I cried out of pure, overwhelming, exhausted relief. I cried because finally, someone actually saw me. Someone completely validated my reality without me having to beg, explain, or present a massive, stressful presentation of legal evidence. I wept until my chest heaved violently and my broken ribs ached fiercely. I let go of 30 years of deeply buried resentment, washing it completely away with heavy tears I should have shed decades ago. Blood absolutely does not make a family. Blood just makes you biologically related. Family is the people who willingly stand in the dark with you when the lights go completely out. Family is the hardworking coworker who brings you hot food. Family is the quiet neighbor who offers to take out your heavy trash. Family is the distant cousin who bravely calls out the abuser. I had a loving family all along. I just had to aggressively clear out the toxic waste in my life to finally see them standing there. Months slowly passed. The heavy, suffocating, humid summer heat eventually gave way to the crisp, cool, refreshing air of autumn. My physical recovery was absolutely brutal. There were dark days when the throbbing pain in my shattered tibia was so intense I could barely make it from my bed to the kitchen to get a glass of water. Physical therapy was a grueling, sweat-inducing, highly painful nightmare of constantly stretching stiff muscles and aggressively retraining my broken body to simply carry its own weight again. But with every single painful step I took in that clinic, I was getting significantly stronger. My bones were actively knitting back together, thicker and far more resilient at the exact breakpoints. And my mind was doing the exact same thing. The specific day the orthopedic doctor finally took the loud mechanical saw and cut the heavy, suffocating fiberglass cast off my right leg was a massive milestone. My leg looked pale, thin, and highly atrophied, but when I carefully placed my bare foot on the cold linoleum floor of the medical clinic, it held my weight. I used a sleek, black medical cane for several weeks after that, slowly and deliberately transitioning from a heavy, painful limp to a steady, highly confident stride. By the time the very first snow fell in the city, I walked confidently into my office building completely unassisted. My promised promotion had been faithfully held for me by upper management. I stepped into my brand new corner office, looked at the shiny brass nameplates sitting on the heavy mahogany desk, and realized something incredible. For the first time in my entire life, every single dollar of my new, higher salary belonged entirely to me. There were no phantom, aggressively inflated utility bills to pay for Robert. There were no emergency financial bailouts for a younger brother who completely refused to grow up and get a job. The deep, burning resentment I used to feel over my stolen college fund slowly faded away, replaced by the sheer pride of knowing I built my success with my own two hands. My bank account was steadily growing, my credit score was flawless, and my future was a completely blank, beautiful canvas. I sat back in my comfortable leather chair and looked out the large glass window at the bustling city below. I realized something highly profound that snowy morning. I had not heard a single solitary word from Robert or Carter in over 6 months. After Elijah's incredibly aggressive, ironclad legal threats regarding the inheritance fraud and the frozen bank accounts, they had simply vanished into thin air. They never reached out to apologize for abandoning me. They never sent a cheap get-well card. They never once called to ask if my leg had healed properly or if I was still in physical pain. They simply found new, easily manipulated victims to complain to and new, pathetic ways to survive without their designated ATM machine. In the very beginning, during those first few terrifying weeks alone in my apartment, a tiny, deeply damaged part of my inner child had secretly hoped they would realize their massive, catastrophic mistake. I had foolishly hoped the sudden shock of losing me would wake my father up. I had hoped he would show up at my front door, crying real tears, begging for my forgiveness, and finally realizing my true worth as his son. But as the long months rolled by, that pathetic hope completely evaporated. And it wasn't replaced by deep sadness. It was replaced by immense, overwhelming gratitude. If they had actually apologized, I might have been foolish enough to let them back into my life. Their absolute, cowardly silence was the greatest gift they could have ever given me. It definitively proved that my harsh boundaries were entirely correct. It proved that they never truly loved me. They only loved what I could continuously provide for them. When the free provision permanently stopped, the relationship instantly ceased to exist. I recently drove past the quiet suburban neighborhood where I grew up. I didn't plan the route intentionally. It was just a random detour due to heavy highway traffic. I drove slowly past the old, familiar house. The front lawn looked slightly unkempt and overgrown. The driveway was completely empty. There was no fancy, expensive Porsche parked proudly out front anymore. The bank had clearly taken it, just as Elijah promised. I looked at the house where I had spent decades desperately trying to earn a father's love that simply did not exist. I didn't feel anger burning in my chest. I didn't feel a lingering, painful sense of loss. I just felt a profound, incredibly peaceful indifference. It was just a house. The people inside it were just deeply flawed people. They had absolutely no power over me anymore. I tapped my fingers on the steering wheel, merged smoothly back into the flow of traffic, and drove forward toward my new life. Healing from toxic family abuse is not at all like healing from a broken bone. A bone breaks, a doctor sets it, and it returns to normal. Healing from a lifetime of severe emotional manipulation means you have to completely rebuild your entire reality from the ground up. You have to actively mourn the loving parents you truly deserved but never actually got. You have to fully accept that the so-called golden child will never validate your pain because their entire survival completely depends on aggressively denying it. You have to finally learn that saying no does not make you a bad person. It makes you a protected person. I am 33 years old now. I am walking perfectly without a cane. My healed ribs do not ache when it rains anymore. My career is thriving. My savings are totally secure, and my circle of friends, my carefully chosen family, is fiercely loyal and incredibly kind. The horrific car crash that nearly ended my life was actually the terrifying catalyst that finally started it. They arrogantly thought leaving me bleeding in that emergency room would firmly remind me of my lowly place. They thought it would permanently break my spirit and force me to beg on my knees for their tiny scraps of affection. Instead, it completely woke me up. It armed me with the truth. It gave me the brilliant clarity to pick up the pen, firmly sign those legal documents, and completely erase them from my story forever. I stopped bleeding for their fake approval. I stopped setting myself on fire just to keep them warm. And in the cold, crisp air of my newly established boundaries, I finally learned how to truly breathe. Before we wrap up this video, I want to take a moment to look directly at you. Yes, you. If you are listening to my story and feeling a tight knot in your stomach because this dynamic sounds a little too familiar in your own life, I need you to hear this very clearly. Loyalty is a beautiful human trait, but blind loyalty to toxic blood relatives is a miserable prison sentence. We are culturally conditioned to believe that family is an unconditional bond, that we must quietly tolerate endless emotional abuse, blatant financial exploitation, and severe disrespect just because we happen to share the same DNA. That is a dangerous, highly manipulative lie designed to keep you trapped. The biggest educational lesson I learned from this entire nightmare is that you absolutely cannot heal in the exact same environment that made you sick in the first place. Setting a firm, non-negotiable boundary is not an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. When you cut off a toxic family member, you are not destroying the family. You are simply refusing to participate in the destruction of yourself. Your hard-earned salary, your rightful inheritance, your mental health, and your daily peace of mind belong exclusively to you. Do not ever let anyone use the word family as a lockpick to break into your life and steal your joy. You do not owe anyone your survival. You do not need to wait for a fake apology that will never come to find your own closure. You are fully allowed to walk away. You are fully allowed to be happy. If this story resonated with you, or if you found genuine value in these lessons, please drop the word good in the comments below. Or better yet, share the most important lesson you are taking away from my experience. Let's build a strong community of people who bravely choose peace over toxic loyalty. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your incredible support. And remember, your life belongs to you. Take the wheel.